Good morning, colleagues in the room. Good morning, colleagues who've joined us virtually. Welcome to day 7 of the National Investigative Inquiry into Food Systems in South Africa. To my right, I am joined by Commissioner Nomahlubi Kwinana. To my left, I am joined by Commissioner Pili Lentuli, our evidence leaders, as well as the staff from the South African Human Rights Commission. I'd like to also then just apologize for the delay in starting late. It was just some administrative issues that required our attention. This morning we are joined by the National House of Traditional and Khoisan Leadership. Thank you for joining us, sir. Briefly just introduce who you are as well as the role you play at the organization.
Okay, thank you very much to the chair of the session. Greetings to the commissioners that are here and all other participants. My name is Khosi Siatlolo. I'm a traditional leader myself. I hail from Mahikeng local municipality. My ancestral land is called Lutlakane village. But I'm here as the chairperson of the National House of Traditional and Khoisan Leaders. I was elected to lead the house a couple of years ago. So we do quite a bit of work on behalf of traditional leaders and our indigenous communities. I guess as we delve into the issues, much of what we do will be explained further. Thank you. And of course, I'm with the Secretary of the House and the Director in my office. Thank you.
Just so that we now go into the second step of the proceedings, may I kindly ask you to stand so that I can either swear you in or affirm you in. Full names once again for the record.
Ke Kgosi Thabo Siatlolo.
Khosi, will you be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation?
Either way, it's fine. The oath, it's fine. I
We'll
don't
take
know.
the oath. Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Galeboa Khosi, can we also then have your secretary? Is he going to be assisting you by answering any questions?
I don't know. He will assist a little bit.
Okay,
But I will be taking the presentation myself.
Okay, can I then ask that I swear him in so that Iskabahore in the middle of the proceedings, we then have to pause and then swear him in?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
My name is Abram Mzakes Tole.
Mr. Satola, your full name, oh, you did say your full names. Will you be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation?
I'll take an oath.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. You may be seated. You have, Khosi, you have until 20 past 9 for your presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and present the issues. The questions were already sent to us. We have prepared responses. I will not necessarily be reading the responses, but I will be speaking to them. The first one speaks to the role in food security and community livelihoods. As to what do we do as the house in making sure that there's accessibility of land, water and other resources for small-scale agriculture, subsistence farming and local food systems. So I think firstly it's important that we explain our role as the National House. We play an advocacy role between the government, traditional authorities, and our traditional communities. So whenever there are specific issues or general issues that have to do with the lack of resources or developmental issues or issues of royalty in essence, we take those issues to government and advocate on behalf of our people. So in this instance, you would find that we engage the relevant departments. The first one would be at the national level, because we operate at the national level, would be the Department of Agriculture, and those who follow the proceedings of the National House, because they are conducted inside Parliament in terms of law. You would have realized that the Minister of Agriculture was called to come and specifically present to the House as to what does he intend to do to make sure that people in rural areas are able to have access to resources to make sure that they are able to make some form of a livelihood, and that would be Minister Stenhazel. And he was there presenting on those issues. But our primary work is to make sure that as traditional leaders or as the National House, is to make sure that land is allocated to small-scale farmers. And that is happening. All the people in the entire country, in rural areas who are calling themselves small-scale farmers, it's because traditional authorities gave them that land so that they can be able to farm. So we are doing it in real terms. So we do allocate that land on a periodical basis during what you call the traditional council meetings, whereby different people, be it an individual or normally a cooperative, would come in front of the traditional authority to say, we need to be allocated a 2 hectares so that we can apply for funding and start doing some form of small-scale farming. And then the other issue that is raised here is how do we manage the water sources? It's important that we contextualize this one. When we speak of water sources in rural areas, we are practically talking about rivers, because when you look at the settlement pattern of African people, whenever they settled in the past 400 or 500 years ago, there were 2 primary considerations: whether there is availability of grazing land and the availability of water sources in terms of rivers. We do not have the necessary infrastructure in rural areas. The only thing that we have are rivers. So rivers do not only play a role in agriculture, but they also serve a purpose in spiritual and cultural matters. So we manage it holistically, inclusive of all those aspects. And also, if you look at some of the projects that are in rural areas, particularly those of agriculture, they're next to the river, so that water can be able to be drawn out from the river to make sure that they give that water to the plantations. So in terms of the first question, those are the 3 key issues. We allocate land to those who want to be in that space of agriculture, but we also manage the water sources, both from an agricultural and cultural and spiritual issues. Then I would move to the second question that speaks about our role in governing and mediating access to land under customary and quiescent tenure systems, and how are the decisions aligned with equitable access and food security objectives. Well, firstly, as the National House, we do not govern land. We do not govern land. Land is governed by traditional authorities in each particular village. So at the primary level, when there are disputes, say for instance, you appear on behalf of a traditional authority and they refuse to give you that piece of land for whatever reason, what would happen is that ordinarily you would go to the local house. And to make it more practical, let's take Mpumalanga, a province, KwaNdebele. There's a local house of KwaNdebele. The local house, it's supposed to make sure that whenever there are disputes between traditional authorities and the community member, they would come in and intervene. And if they are not happy, if the complainant is not happy, then they would take the matter to the provincial house. And if they are not happy with the outcome, they would take it to the national house. So we play more as an appeals body, because there are other bodies between ourselves and the traditional authority. So whenever the community member is not happy, feeling that they're being discriminated unfairly, we would play that intermediary role and serve as an appeals body. But we also advise government whenever there are parliamentary bills that has to do with agriculture, or anything that would directly affect traditional communities and traditional authorities. We would play a role to make sure that we put the interest of our traditional communities, and specifically the small-scale farmers. I think the last bill that had to do with the matter that is on the table had to do with the preservation of the agricultural land. And that is something that is quite important to us as the National House, because whenever there are no development activities that are happening, you would find that perhaps local politicians would say, why don't we put the RDPs there? But for us, we don't agree with that as traditional leaders and as the National House, because we cannot keep having residential areas everywhere, but those people would have nowhere to produce food and be able to feed themselves, but over and above that, to conduct business. So part of the submissions we made to the preservation of agricultural land was to make sure that that land in rural areas is secured properly, particularly arable land, where we are able to produce food. We were urging government to make sure that land in rural areas are preserved, so that small-scale farmers, and hopefully in future, because we cannot continue to be small-scale farmers, but in future we can be able to grow and move from being small-scale farmers. The last issue on this point has to do with the limitation on the availability of land. Remember, when African people in 1913 were pushed to that space of 13%, a lot of it was barren. So through restitution purposes, there is what you call communal property associations. But communal property associations, a lot of them are dysfunctional. So also part of the submissions we are making to government is to say, the land was taken from traditional communities. You should not set up something that is entirely different from what was given, because majority of land that is given back is agricultural land. And you see, that is why we keep speaking about small-scale farmers. It's because we don't have access to land to make sure that we farm professionally and in large scale. So we are saying to government that the model that is being utilized by giving land back to a committee within a community just continues to bring more divisions, and we are not able to migrate the small-scale farmers to commercial farmers. And then on the third question, it speaks about indigenous knowledge and sustainable practices. How does the National House promote indigenous knowledge? So this also speaks about preservation of those pieces of land, so that future generations are also able to farm, as we also inherited those lands from the previous generations. And you find that because of the climate change and the torrential rains, you find that when there's a lot of rain, you find what we call alien plants. And alien plants play a very huge role in limiting the already limited resource as in terms of land. So what we do as the National House, we work very closely with the Department of Forestry and Fisheries. So whenever we see encroachment of alien plants, we speak to them so that scientifically they can come through to make sure that they identify it properly. But more importantly, we make sure that it's taken out, because encroachment of alien plants, it's into the limited land that we are using already. And on preservation of organic seeds and in terms of what we eat, like mabele, dinawa, morogo, and so forth. As the National House, we do not have the necessary budget to develop a seed bank to make sure that we preserve that. Remember, we act as an advocacy body, but of course, that is needed. We need to have a seed bank whereby all the indigenous food, because remember the indigenous food, the important thing about it is that it does not come with a lot of chemicals or GMOs or so forth. It's highly nutritional, and even if you do not have meat, you are able to live off those kinds of the traditional seeds. So it's quite important that at some point we are able to access some form of funding so that different communities are able to preserve the different seeds, because what is growing in Limpopo will not necessarily grow in Northern Cape. So it means also that seed bank will not only be a national one, but provincially, because the different climate tells you that different small-scale farmers will have different seeds that they're producing. And then on the inclusion, 10.4, on the inclusion of vulnerable groups, how do we as the House ensure that there's participation and equitable access of women, youth and marginalized groups within traditional and Khoisan communities in decisions affecting food production and resource allocation? If you look at the acts that governs us, specifically on the composition of traditional authority, 1/3 of it says should be women. So it means if there are 18 members in a traditional authority, 1/3 of that has to be women. When we were doing that, we were trying to address an issue of having traditional authorities that do not have women. And remember this to food security. When you are presiding over a traditional authority, you are presiding over different matters. That would be of marriage, that would be of anything. That would be of disputes of land, that would be disputes of whatever nature in a community. So there are certain issues that would need specifically, because of the sensitivity of the issue. So there are specific issues that would need only women to deal with. So we deal with that. The women are inside traditional authorities. And remember now, you've got a lot of women who are traditional leaders themselves, even inside the National House, in terms of law, because each province has three delegates. One of them are females. So even inside the National House, naturally you've got female traditional leaders who are there to protect the interest of women. But it's important that we address this issue, because it's on the media a lot that traditional or to women. But when you go to traditional communities, it's a completely different story, because a lot of women who are not even married, they do have land. Whenever or you'd find that it's for this agriculture that we are talking about in terms of small scale, you might find that it's a female-only cooperative. We do not allocate land on the basis of gender. We allocate land on the basis of a need. So whenever women need land, we give land to women. In fact, in some of the laws, in African culture, usually they don't give land to men if they are not married. And a lot of men are complaining about that. But women are given land even if they are not married because they have children. So what you hear on the TV, uh, uh, if somebody is trying to dispute what we are saying let's go to different communities and test it out. We are fully rejecting that notion and of course there's one or two isolated incidents whereby one traditional leader would say no, I will not give land to women, but over 99% of women in rural communities they do have land. So it's important that we clarify this issue and hopefully we put it to rest because I'm a traditional leader myself. I'm not speaking from a theoretical point. It's something that was practiced by my father, my grandfather, and so forth. You find women having portions having portions of agricultural land, and they for the past 100 years. So I don't know what is being talked about when they say traditional leaders are refusing to allocate a land to females, be it land for residential purposes or land for agricultural or business purposes. And then on coordination with government and other institutions, how does the National House engage with agriculture, water and sanitation, social development and other departments to integrate community-based food systems and protect the right to food? Well, primarily as the National House, we engage with all government departments, and in this case, that would be land reform, rural development, and also the Department of Agriculture. But we've come to realize that government is very slow in bringing change. So we took a decision as traditional leaders that we need to look to the private sector. And if you look at the geographic locations of traditional communities, they live much more closer to Afrikaner farmers. And also because one of our key priorities is social cohesion. So we said, let's go and engage organized Afrikaner communities. Let's engage Agri-SA, let's engage AfriForum, let's engage the likes of SAI to see what we can do to put land in rural communities to production. Because if you look at previous governments, they used to do that. Land in rural communities used to be highly productive. And that was because they worked very closely with organized Afrikaner communities. So when we held our midterm review, it was a 3-day. One was focused on governance, one on political parties, and one day was focused on business and particularly agriculture because the one resource we have is land. So we had the likes of Agri-SA, the likes of SAI, and many Afrikaner agricultural organizations to say, guys, how can we work together to make sure that we utilize our land effectively and people in our communal land are able to eat off from their land. So there's a lot of enthusiasm from those agricultural communities to work with traditional leaders. In fact, there are some of the projects we have already implemented. The most recent one is in Koga Morena Mota, Morena e Moholo Mota, ko Qwaqwa, whereby they have a feeding scheme. They feed community members on a daily basis, but they were just buying things and they don't have money. So we engaged AfriForum and we said, can we go there with your agricultural departments? Then we went there, they were able to assist the community in drilling a borehole, in designing the entire thing, in terms of a food garden, in putting a solar plant, and also in training the community members, both male and female, in training the community members so that they are able to produce food for themselves. So that project is ongoing, but because we thrive on partnerships, we've got almost a lot of partners. What we are also implementing currently is a project between ourselves and the Department of Small Business. Because we are looking at communal farmers and small-scale farmers that you are referring to here, we will be drilling boreholes for small-scale farmers. We will also be building crawls whereby you would be dipping tanks, what you call dipping tanks. So we are doing quite a bit of work with our private partners, because the turnaround in government is quite slow. And in this current term, it's even worse, because when the GNU came in, they had to start separating the land reform from agriculture. So after the current elections that we are on, at least you need 2 years to separate those two departments. So much as we called the Minister Steenhuisen to come and speak about what he's going to do for small-scale farmers in traditional communities, a lot of work that he's doing is in separating himself from the rural department. But we are doing quite a bit of work. We are working with different NGOs in different aspects, so that we can bring change into our communities. The second last question is on monitoring, accountability, and conflict resolutions. What mechanisms exist to monitor land and resource use, to resolve those disputes and ensure governance practices that support sustainable, equitable, and secure food systems? A traditional leader does not operate alone. It's not like my community is my farm where I can do what I want. Firstly, in terms of law, headmen and headwomen, the composition of what you call 60% in the act that governs us, the TKLA, you are working with headmen and headwomen who compose 60%, but also you have communal representations in terms of 40%. So because decisions in a communal space are made at a traditional authority, it means decisions that are made, they compose of head women and head men at 60%, and they compose of the community members who are part of the traditional authority at 40%. So it means that community members are integrated, or the immediate part of decision making in preservation of the food systems, but also whenever there are disputes. It's not like it's just royalty sitting on the other side and community sitting on the other side. We govern land together, but also remember, the traditional leader is accountable to the royal family that installed him. So whenever the community, or even the 60% or the 40%, are not happy perhaps with the decision or the conduct, for that matter, of the traditional leader, they've got the royal family to complain to. But beyond the royal family, they've got the provincial house and the national house, and that would be inclusive of the premier and the minister to go and report whatever misgivings they might be having about the traditional leader. So the system is insulated from potential abuse. And then on the last question, in terms of the gaps, the limitations, and reform commitments, what are institutional, legal, or capacity constraints that limit the national house effectiveness in promoting food security, sustainable resource management, and community livelihoods? And what reforms or commitments are planned to strengthen its contribution to the right to food? You see, the topic that is being discussed here is very close to traditional leaders. Dikgosi, remember, we are not like politicians where we speak and we live outside. No, you are born inside the community, you live there all your life, and when you pass on, you will be buried there. So and we do not want to lead people who are malnutritioned, because firstly, how will they be able to work? Nobody wants to have that kind of community that is suffering. So the topic is quite close to us, but the question of limitation here is very important to us, because there is so much we want to do, and it's worse because now you've got a lot of young traditional leaders who are from even the university. They come up with their own development initiatives to extricate their communities from abject poverty that they are finding themselves in now. So the limitation is, much as those traditional leaders want to bring change in productive, in making sure that small scale farmers are moving to the next level, the reality is that the resources are not there. Starting with the national house, the resources are required. For an example, the food bank, the seed bank that we were talking about, to preserve those traditional and the traditional and indigenous seeds. So we need the resources to continue to do more work. Hence, we took a decision to engage more with private sector, because we realized that it has been 30 years. Government speaks about rural development. Whenever there are meant for people to apply for grant funding, rural people do not see that, but they do apply. They come to traditional authorities. We write letters on their behalf confirming to government departments that we have allocated land to them. But you never get to see that funding. So those are some of, in fact, that's the main limitation, the question of resources, so that people in the rural areas are able to feed themselves. I think you can see that I think we are sitting on 29 million people who are on grant, on the social grant. And I think the majority of those people are in rural areas. That tells you about the situation that we are facing. But on our side, as traditional authorities, whenever land is required for agricultural purposes, we immediately do that. I think I will end my presentation here, and I'm sure there are questions. We will wait for questions and take them. Thank you.
So much, Josi. I think there are a lot of questions. I'm going to hand over to our evidence team or our evidence leaders so that they can go through the questions that they have.
Good morning. Thank you for your submission and your presentation. The first question I would like to ask, I think maybe because you mentioned it last, is you mentioned that the National House was looking at seeking private partners like the Agri-SA and the Land Bank to make the land more productive. And so my question to you is, how do you ensure that these private-public partnerships prioritize local household nutrition and the right to food over the commercial interests of large-scale agribusiness?
Yeah, no, thank you. What is important is balance between the two, because the interests of those organizations that you are referring to, they're looking at commercializing and making sure that there's big profits. But when you enter into negotiations, each party it's their own responsibility to make sure that whatever agreement that you are getting yourself into, your interests are adhered to. And in our case is what you are referring to, into making sure that those products actually end up in that community and are able to sustain those households. Because when you look at the makeup of the households, predominantly you find that firstly they are female-headed, and they are not only female-headed, but they've got young children that are there, and those young children needs to be fed. So our responsibility is in two ways: is at a leadership level as traditional leaders, but also because we've got an administrative team and that is comprised of the legal department. The legal department also, because we are talking about contracts and agreement. the legal department, we push it to make sure that those interests that you are referring to, they are covered legally, because there are many instances whereby you commercial projects, but as soon as there's harvest, that harvest will go to the market, and sometimes the proceeds will just be going to the partner that is coming with the biggest resources. So it's something we are quite aware of, because we see it in certain instances, because you would find a large commercial partner coming in saying, no, let's develop the land, let's get it productive. And especially in the case of communal property associations, it's more rife there. Because land would be given, the farm would be given back to the community. And then they will say, we'll give you a mentor as a community, because you don't know, that's what they say, that no, you don't know anything about agriculture. Then they will draft the contract. Government will play a very huge role in drafting a contract on behalf of the community with the commercial partner. And then the community will be screwed at the end. So I think we have learned a lot on a practical basis, and we make sure that we secure our people. Thank you.
Thank you. So my second question is, how can government and the National House find a middle ground that allows communal land to be used as economic collateral for investment without risking the loss of collective ownership to banks?
So when when organizations, perhaps part of what we didn't mention is that we are also talking to the banks. Because the banks are the ones who will say, no, we want collateral. But remember, in this country, African or black people, to be more specific, the only land that they collectively own is the 13%, it's rural land. Now, if we were to agree on taking that land as a collateral, and all those businesses, they collapse, it means the only land that is owned by black people in this country will go to the banks. And the banks will sell that land to whoever wants. So what we are trying to say through the communal land tenure bill, part of our inputs that we are making into that bill is to try and address that part, to say, government, you can even serve as a guarantor, because you do that for ESCOM, you do that for all these government agencies that continue to drain money of the taxpayers. Why don't we go into triple P, whereby it's the community itself, it's government, and it's the private sector, and you are able to guarantee on behalf of the community. And as time goes on, we would be in a position to, once we are able to break and get to the point of making profit, then we can start being self-sustainable. Remember, this happened during, and it's something that is a little bit controversial, but I come from the former Putatswana area. It's something that was done by that apartheid government. And all that land in our area, because we are within the Maize Triangle, all that land was in production at that point. So we are not speaking from a theoretical point. It's something that our parents are telling us, and we also saw it towards the tail end, that all the land was productive. So it's something that is doable, but the attitude, this is the last and important point. The attitude of government needs to change. Just because people are poor does not mean they are unable to think and find solutions for themselves. So you find a situation where, but when you speak of the middle ground, government a lot of times, because rural people are poor, they want to find solutions on their behalf. And government is not necessarily smart. They just happen to have resources. Having resources does not make you smart. It's us who are living on the land, and we know how can we best cultivate it for our own interests. So it's a point we are driving to our politicians, but of course it's not well received. Thank you.